Why it did not feel like the end from the inside. One of the most misleading assumptions about collapse is that people living through it must somehow recognize it as such. This assumption is rooted in hindsight. Looking backward, it is easy to identify patterns, turning points, and long-term trajectories. Living inside a system, none of this is visible. What people experience is not historical narrative, but daily life. And daily life has a powerful capacity to absorb deterioration without labeling it as terminal. For most inhabitants of the late Roman world, the empire did not appear to be ending. It appeared to be changing, tightening, becoming more demanding, and less predictable. These changes were felt as pressure rather than as finality. Pressure can be endured. Finality demands a response. Rome produced the former, not the latter. Psychologically, humans are far better at adapting than at recognizing thresholds. When conditions worsen gradually, adaptation becomes the dominant strategy. Each small loss is manageable. Each new inconvenience can be rationalized. What would have seemed unacceptable to a previous generation becomes normal to the next. This incremental adjustment prevents any single moment from standing out as decisive. In Rome, this process unfolded over centuries. Currency lost value slowly enough that people adjusted prices rather than abandoning markets. Security declined unevenly, prompting local defenses rather than collective panic. Administrative burdens increased gradually, leading to resignation rather than rebellion. None of these developments, taken alone, signaled an ending. Together, they transformed the system. Another crucial factor was continuity of form. The visible markers of order remained. Titles existed. Laws were cited. Officials wore familiar insignia. Courts still convened. Even when effectiveness declined, the presence of recognizable institutions created the impression that the system was intact. Humans rely heavily on symbols to assess stability. As long as the symbols persist, the absence of underlying coherence is difficult to articulate. This continuity also shaped expectation. People do not compare their present to an idealized past, they compare it to yesterday. As long as today resembles yesterday closely enough, the situation feels tolerable. Rome's decline did not involve sudden disappearance of familiar structures. It involved gradual degradation. That made it survivable, and therefore invisible. Generational turnover reinforced this effect. Each generation inherited a version of the empire that felt normal to them. They did not experience loss in absolute terms. They experienced it as baseline. What historians later identify as decline was, for contemporaries, simply the world as it was. This is why apocalyptic language fails to describe the Roman experience. Apocalypse implies revelation. Rome revealed nothing. It concealed change through continuity. The system did not collapse, it thinned. It did not break, it stretched. Another reason the end was difficult to perceive is that agency remained fragmented. No single decision caused collapse. No single actor could be blamed. Change occurred through accumulation of small choices, each rational in context. Without a clear villain or event, there was nothing to resist directly. Discontent existed, but it lacked focus. People continued to hope for stabilization. Reforms were announced. New leaders promised renewal. Administrative adjustments created the impression that correction was possible. Hope does not require success. It only requires plausibility. Rome maintained plausibility long after it lost coherence. The experience of living in late Rome was therefore not one of witnessing an ending, but of inhabiting a system that demanded more while offering less. Life became narrower. Horizons shortened. Ambitions adjusted downward. Survival replaced progress. This transition was felt emotionally, but not narratively. There was discomfort without diagnosis. This internal experience is central to Rome's modern resonance. It shows that systems do not need to convince people that they are healthy in order to persist. They only need to prevent people from recognizing that they are terminal. As long as life continues, as long as routines remain, the possibility that the system itself is ending remains abstract. Rome teaches that the end of a system is rarely experienced as an end by those inside it. It is experienced as an increasingly constrained normality. And that is precisely what makes it so difficult to see while it is happening. Why this resonates with the modern world. The reason Rome continues to resonate is not because modern societies are identical to it, but because the internal experience feels structurally similar. The comparison is not historical, it is psychological. Modern individuals live inside systems that are vast, complex, and largely impersonal. These systems function continuously, often efficiently, but they are difficult to interpret from the inside. People experience outcomes without seeing processes, and they encounter rules without encountering authors. In contemporary life, decisions that shape everyday existence are rarely visible as decisions. They appear as policies, procedures, technical requirements, or automated outcomes. Responsibility is distributed across institutions, committees, algorithms, and regulations. No single actor appears to be in charge of the whole. This mirrors the late Roman shift from personal authority to procedural power. Authority becomes something you interact with, not something you confront. Like late Rome, modern systems do not feel as if they are failing outright. They feel strained. There is a sense of permanent adjustment, reforms, updates, restructurings, optimizations. Systems are always being improved, but rarely questioned at the level of purpose. Activity replaces direction. Motion substitutes for meaning. Modern individuals adapt in much the same way Roman citizens did. Expectations are quietly lowered. Horizons shorten. People focus on navigating procedures rather than shaping outcomes. Long-term visions give way to short-term management. Stability becomes defined as the absence of immediate crisis rather than the presence of progress. Another parallel lies in the normalization of complexity. Modern life is saturated with rules, interfaces, credentials, permissions, and classifications. Navigating these systems requires constant cognitive effort, but that effort becomes background noise. People stop asking why systems exist and focus instead on how to survive within them. This is not apathy, it is adaptation. Rome resonates because it offers historical confirmation that such a condition is not unprecedented. It tells us that societies can remain highly organized while losing a shared sense of direction. It shows that administrative continuity can coexist with existential uncertainty. Importantly, Rome allows modern observers to think about this condition without direct confrontation. Contemporary systems are politically charged and emotionally fraught. Critiquing them directly invites conflict. Rome provides distance. It creates a safe frame in which to explore uncomfortable ideas about institutional inertia, loss of meaning, and structural exhaustion without naming present actors or taking explicit positions. This is why Rome appears in moments of cultural anxiety. It acts as a proxy. People are not saying that they live in Rome. They are saying that they recognize the pattern. The slow drift, the accumulation of procedures, the sense that systems persist because dismantling them feels riskier than continuing. Rome also reassures in a subtle way. It suggests that such conditions are survivable. People lived through late Rome. Life continued. Meaning adjusted. This does not make the situation desirable, but it makes it intelligible. The resonance, then, is not predictive but interpretive. Rome does not tell modern societies what will happen. It helps them understand what they are already experiencing. It provides a vocabulary for a diffuse unease that lacks clear expression in contemporary language. In this sense, Rome functions less as a warning and more as a mirror. It reflects back an image of complexity without coherence, continuity without clarity, and survival without direction. That reflection is unsettling precisely because it feels familiar. From personal power to procedural power in early Rome, power was visible and personal. Authority could be named. Decisions were associated with identifiable individuals. Magistrates, generals, and later emperors embodied the state in ways that were psychologically legible. Even when authority was contested, it was still human. One could point to a person and say, "This is who governs, this is who commands, this is who is responsible." This personal quality of power made conflict direct and accountability imaginable, even if it was imperfect. As the Roman system expanded and stabilized, this form of power gradually transformed. Authority moved away from individuals and into offices. Roles became more important than the people occupying them. Procedures replaced discretion. Power was no longer exercised primarily through personal judgment, but through compliance with established processes. This shift did not occur suddenly, and it was not framed as a loss. It was framed as efficiency, continuity, and order. This transformation had profound consequences. When power becomes procedural, it gains durability. Offices persist even as individuals change. Decisions continue even when conviction fades. The system no longer depends on charisma, loyalty, or belief. It depends on participation. One does not need to agree with the system to operate within it. One only needs to follow procedure. In late Rome, this proceduralization of power meant that authority became increasingly abstract. Laws were enforced not because an official believed in their justice, but because enforcement was required. Taxes were collected not because they were seen as legitimate, but because collection was mandated. Military orders were executed not as expressions of strategy, but as obligations embedded in hierarchy. The logic of action shifted from intention to requirement. This shift also changed how responsibility was experienced. When decisions are framed as procedural necessities, moral ownership dissolves. Each actor performs a limited function within a larger mechanism. Outcomes emerge from the interaction of many such functions, but no single participant feels responsible for the result. Responsibility becomes distributed to the point of invisibility. Rome demonstrates that this diffusion of responsibility does not require malice. It arises naturally from scale and complexity. As systems grow, they cannot rely on personal judgment alone. They must standardize behavior. Standardization, in turn, reduces discretion. Reduced discretion weakens the sense of authorship. People act because the system demands it, not because they have chosen the outcome. This procedural power is highly resilient. It resists collapse because it is not tied to belief. Even when legitimacy erodes, the system continues to operate through habit, inertia, and necessity. Individuals comply because non-compliance is costly, confusing, or dangerous. Over time, obedience becomes routine rather than ideological. At the same time, procedural power hollows out meaning. When no one feels responsible for direction, purpose becomes vague. Goals are redefined in technical terms. Success is measured by compliance, efficiency, or stability rather than by substantive outcomes. The system begins to exist for its own maintenance. Late Rome illustrates this clearly. Authority was everywhere and nowhere. Rules proliferated, but conviction weakened. The empire did not lack power, it lacked a shared sense of why power was exercised in a particular way. Governance became an exercise in management rather than leadership. This transformation explains why Rome feels so contemporary. Modern systems operate under the same logic. Power is encountered through interfaces, regulations, algorithms, and procedures. Decisions arrive without visible decision makers. Responsibility dissolves into structure. No one appears fully in control, yet the system continues to function. Rome shows that this form of power is not an anomaly of modernity. It is a structural outcome of scale. Once authority becomes procedural, it gains endurance at the cost of meaning. The system survives, but it no longer knows why it does. This is the paradox Rome leaves behind, a form of power strong enough to persist without belief, yet too abstract to sustain purpose. And it is precisely this paradox that modern societies recognize when they think about Rome. Why moral explanations fail, and why we cling to them. One of the most persistent ways people explain the decline of Rome is through morality. The story is familiar and comforting: decadence, corruption, excess, loss of virtue, weakness of character. These explanations feel intuitive because they assign cause and responsibility. They imply that collapse happens when people become worse. This makes decline legible and, in a sense, deserved. But moral explanations fail to account for how Rome actually functioned in its later centuries. Late Roman society did not collapse because people stopped caring, stopped working, or stopped trying. On the contrary, many of the most intense reform efforts occurred precisely during periods historians later identify as decline. Administrators attempted to stabilize currency. Emperors reorganized provinces. Military leaders adapted recruitment and strategy. Legal scholars expanded and refined Roman law. None of this suggests a civilization that had simply given up. Moral explanations persist because they reduce complexity. They allow people to imagine that systems fail because of individual behavior rather than structural limits. This is psychologically attractive. If decline is caused by vice, then it can be prevented by virtue. If Rome fell because people became immoral, then modern societies can reassure themselves that they will be safe as long as they remain disciplined or righteous. Rome undermines this reassurance. The Roman system did not fail because it lacked intelligence or effort. It failed because it reached levels of complexity that made meaningful adaptation increasingly dangerous. Each attempted reform risked destabilizing other parts of the system. Simplification threatened collapse. Change became something to fear rather than pursue. This creates a deeply uncomfortable conclusion. Systems can fail even when everyone is acting rationally within their local context. Rome's decline was not driven by a collapse of values, but by the accumulation of constraints. Economic pressures limited options. Military commitments consumed resources. Administrative expansion created rigidity. Each decision narrowed the range of future decisions. Over time, the system trapped itself. Moral narratives obscure this reality because they personalize failure. They shift attention away from structure and toward character. This makes history easier to digest, but less accurate. It also makes modern reflection safer. Blaming decadence allows observers to distance themselves from Rome's fate. Structural explanations do not offer that distance. Rome shows that collapse can be impersonal. It does not require villains. It does not require betrayal. It does not require corruption beyond what any large system inevitably produces. It only requires a mismatch between complexity and adaptability. This is why moral explanations are so persistent and so misleading. They allow people to believe that decline is avoidable through correct behavior. Rome suggests that decline can occur even in societies that are disciplined, capable, and highly organized. That realization is unsettling because it removes the comfort of blame. It implies that the problem is not that people failed, but that the system outgrew its own capacity to remain coherent. Rome forces us to confront the possibility that no amount of virtue can fully compensate for structural exhaustion. And that is precisely why moral explanations continue to circulate. They protect us from that conclusion. Rome as a safe language for anxiety directly confronting the idea of collapse is psychologically difficult. Concepts like apocalypse, end of civilization, or systemic failure demand urgency, fear, and immediate judgment. They trigger instinctive reactions, denial, panic, or ideological polarization. For most people, these reactions are unproductive. They shut down reflection rather than enabling it. Rome enters precisely at this point as a softer, indirect alternative. Talking about Rome creates distance. It places anxiety at arm's length, safely contained within history. You are not saying that the present is ending. You are describing something that already ended long ago. This temporal separation allows the mind to explore disturbing possibilities without feeling threatened by them. Rome functions as a buffer between perception and fear. This is why references to Rome feel strangely calming despite their subject matter. They frame decline as something slow, survivable, and human rather than catastrophic and final. Rome shows that people live through deterioration. They adapted. They adjusted expectations. Life continued. This does not make decline desirable, but it makes it thinkable. Rome also removes the demand for immediate conclusions. Apocalyptic language pushes toward action: prevent, escape, resist. Roman language invites observation. It allows people to sit with ambiguity, to notice patterns without committing to predictions. This makes it uniquely suited for periods where uncertainty dominates but no single crisis defines the moment. Another reason Rome functions as a safe language is that it lacks a clear villain. Apocalypse narratives require an antagonist, an enemy, a mistake, a betrayal. Rome diffuses blame across time, institutions, and circumstances. This diffusion reduces emotional intensity. It allows analysis without accusation. Importantly, Rome also avoids moral panic. It does not require declaring the present immoral, degenerate, or doomed. It frames decline as a structural process rather than a moral verdict. This makes the conversation accessible to people who would otherwise reject alarmist framing. Rome gives anxiety a historical grammar. Instead of raw fear, it offers comparison. Instead of panic, it offers perspective. People can say this feels Roman without having to specify exactly what they fear. The phrase carries enough shared meaning to communicate unease without triggering defensive reactions. This is why Rome appears in jokes, memes, casual remarks, and serious analysis alike. Its function is not to persuade, but to signal. It communicates a feeling that something is off, without demanding agreement on what that something is. In this sense, Rome operates as a pressure release valve. It allows societies to acknowledge tension without escalating it, to recognize instability without naming it as terminal. This makes it both powerful and ambiguous. Rome does not tell us what will happen. It tells us that what we are experiencing has a shape. And that shape is survivable, even if it is uncomfortable. This is why Rome persists as a mental reference point. It does not solve anxiety. It contains it. Why Rome refuses to leave. Rome refuses to leave modern thought because it occupies an unresolved space. It is not distant enough to feel mythical, and not close enough to feel politically charged. It sits in between, where reflection is possible without immediate consequence. Rome is finished as a state, but unfinished as an idea. That incompleteness is precisely what keeps it alive. Rome does not offer a clear ending. It does not provide the psychological relief of closure. There is no single moment when the world unmistakably ends and something entirely new begins. Instead, there is overlap. Transformation without consensus. Decline without declaration. This lack of resolution mirrors how large systems actually change, and that realism makes Rome difficult to dismiss. People return to Rome not because they are searching for a lesson, but because Rome allows them to articulate something they cannot yet fully name. It offers a way to think about continuity without coherence, stability without direction, and survival without purpose. These are uncomfortable ideas, but Rome frames them in a way that feels intellectually manageable. Rome also endures because it resists simplification. It cannot be reduced to a single cause, a single failure, or a single moral judgment. It frustrates clean narratives. Any attempt to explain Rome fully collapses under its own complexity. This resistance mirrors the modern experience of living inside systems that are too large to grasp and too entrenched to escape. In this sense, Rome functions less as a warning and more as a companion thought. It does not shout. It does not predict. It does not command action. It simply remains present, available as a reference when reality feels heavier than expected and explanations feel thinner than they used to. Rome shows that systems can persist long after their original purpose has faded, carried forward by habit, structure, and necessity. It shows that decline does not require drama, only duration. And it shows that people can live meaningful lives inside systems that no longer make sense in the way they once did. This is not comforting, but it is clarifying. Rome does not tell us what will happen next. It tells us that the feeling of living inside an unresolved system is not new. It has existed before, at scale, for generations. That recognition is the real reason Rome refuses to stay in the past. It is not a prophecy. It is not nostalgia. It is a pattern that remains usable as long as complexity outpaces clarity. Rome does not return because we expect to become it. It returns because, in certain moments, it already feels familiar.